So there is something quite paradoxical about the end of the first chapter of Moed Katan. And we've talked about the kinds of work which we can do on the intermediate days of a festival. And the principle is that essentially we carry out work that would effectively entail a significant monetary loss if it's not carried out. Or we carry out work that can't be carried out before the festival. So those are the kind of principles we operate by. And then we shifted into digging tombs on and to bury dead people on the intermediate days. And now, as if to provide a mirror image of questions about taking care of the dead on the intermediate days, the Mishnah then shifts into whether we can experience joy and whether we can get married. Ein nosin nashim b'moed. We don't get married on the moed, on the intermediate days. And the Mishnah continues, Lo v'tula v'lo almana v'lo miyabamin mipnei shesimcha hilo. Not to a virgin, not to a widow. We don't do levirate marriage. We wouldn't marry the wife of one's dead brother. Mipnei shesimcha hilo, because it makes you happy. Somehow the Mishnah doesn't seem to want us to be too happy on the intermediate days. Or I think what is going on is that there's a particular type of happiness going on in the intermediate days, which is the happiness of the festival. And the Mishnah is saying, look, please don't mix up this happiness with the happiness of a wedding. They're different things. They're different things. Don't mix up these two happinesses. Don't get married on Chol HaMoed because it makes you happy. And then he goes on to with us. The Mishnah goes on with a statement which I think we would find slightly puzzling. But the Mishnah says, Aval machazir hu et grushato. Someone can remarry his divorced wife. Somehow it seems that remarrying a divorced wife, it doesn't carry the same level of simcha as any of these other weddings that we've talked about. So they're permitted on Chol HaMoed. They seem not to have that kind of simcha. And then ve'osa isha tachshiteha b'moed. A woman can adorn herself during the festival, during the intermediate days. When we're talking about when the Mishnah here talks about the festival b'moed, it's always talking about the intermediate days. The Rambam made that clear in his introduction. Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo tasud mipnei shenivul hula. Rabbi Yehuda says, okay, she can put on adornments, but she can't use lime. People used to use lime as a kind of depilatory, as a hair removal substance at the time of the Mishnah. Interesting, actually, sociologically, to think that people were worried about getting rid of excess hair then, just as they are now. Anyway, and Rabbi Yehuda says, okay, women can put on their adornments, but don't use depilatory shenivul hula, because it disfigures her. Essentially, after the treatment's finished, obviously it achieves whatever effect it's wanted, but while the treatment's going on, it's unpleasant, and we're not going to do that on the intermediate days. Another principle that we're going to find, and this is really the principle with which we close the first chapter of the Mishnah, is that we're not going to behave like a professional. We've seen this actually in the first few Mishnayot when we talked about improving land. We learned that we don't kind of set traps in a professional way. And just following on this line, ha'hedyot tofer kadarko. A hedyot is a Greek word, but it means in the language which is cognate with our word idiot, but it doesn't mean an idiot. It means just an ordinary person with no particular skill. Ha'hedyot tofer kadarko. A normal person can sow on the intermediate days. Uman machliv. A craftsman does, gosh, well, there's a funny word here. Machliv is related to the root of dog for kelev, and I've translated here as dog stitches, but some people interpret it as uneven stitches. Essentially, a craftsman is not allowed to perform his craft, but if he needs to fix something for his own purposes, he can basically do kind of coarse stitching, kind of maybe he can kind of do coarse stitching. I've seen it also translated as cat stitching in one of the commentators, but I can't see cat stitching anywhere on the internet as a real thing. Umsarginat amitot, and they can weave the ropes of a bed. So in the ancient times, the bed was just a bed frame with the beams, and you'd have a warp and a weft. You'd have crisscross ropes in the beam in order to actually make it tight enough to lie on. That's, by the way, the origin of the expression sleep tight, good night, sleep tight. It's got to be tight. And Rabbi Yossi actually talks about tightening. Rabbi Yossi Omer, af mematchen. We can even tighten them. He's saying, look, even when the bed is already set up, on Chol HaMoed, we can even tighten it when it's not strictly necessary, because we need the bed to sleep on. Ma'amidin tanur v'kirayim berechaim b'moed. We can stand up an oven or a stove or a millstone during the festival, and we're going to need this anyway. But these are objects that are assembled rather than created. So, for example, an oven is essentially put together by placing one fireproof bricks one on top of the other. The oven of Athnai was actually built with circular bricks, but we put the oven together by putting the bricks together. Similarly, with the millstone, we put one millstone on top of the other to make it work. So we are allowed to do, we're not creating something new, we're just putting it up. Ma'amidin literally means to put it up. We're just putting it up on the intermediate days. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ein b'chavshin et harechaim batchila. We're not going to mechavshin can mean to press, but it also seems to mean to sharpen or to roughen. So when they used to use millstones for the first time, they'd roughen them up. And that is really serious technical work. And so we're not going to do that on the intermediate days. But we'll come back to this word mechavshin at the end of the Mishnah. And then the final Mishnah in the chapter, and we're going to close here. Osin ma'akeh legag lemirpeset ma'aseh hediot. We can make a guardrail around a roof or a balcony. And the Mishnah says ma'aseh hediot, as a hediot would do, as an ordinary person would do. And I've translated here as in an ordinary way. Aval lo ma'aseh uman. We don't make one like a craftsman would make it. Again, the theme running through these Mishnayot is that we do kind of amateur DIY, do-it-yourself kind of work, but we don't do craftsman's work. And the Rambam explains, I brought the Rambam on the source sheet actually, when he says in an ordinary way, Ma'aseh hediot, he says, Ma'aseh hediot kamosh katam zichro sheyiten ha'avanim zo al gav zo below tit. We put the stones on top of one on top of the other, but we don't plaster them. In other words, we do kind of amateur kind of work, right? We just pile the stones up one on top of the other. We're not actually going to finish it off in a way a real craftsman would do it. And along the same lines, shafinat astakin, we're going to put plaster on crevices because we don't want stuff or rain to come in on the moed or air to come in. So shafinat hastakim, we put plaster on crevices. Magilin otan, and we're going to flatten them down. Magila, with a roller. Biyad over regel, either by hand or by foot. Aval lo b'machalat sam, lo va machalat sim, not with a something called a machalat sim. And again, this is an odd word to translate. And Jastrow says it's a windlass. Of course, we don't really understand what a windlass is in English any better than we do machalat sim in Hebrew, but it seems to be some kind of roller operated with a rope. So this is like professional scaffolding style stuff. You'd have a roller with a rope that you would roll over your roof in order to flatten out the plaster. And again, that's professional style. We're not going to do that. Hatzir ve'hatzinor ve'hakora ve'hamanul, a hinge or a socket or a beam or a lock, ve'hamafteach, a key, shenishbaru, if any of these things broke, mataknan b'moed, we need to repair them. Uvilvad, shelo yechaven melachto b'moed, but only if you don't plan to do your work on the festival. V'chol kavashin, we're going to come back to this word, this root kavash, but here it means to pickle rather than to press. V'chol kavashin shehu yachol lechol mehen b'moed kovshan. All the pickled food that he can eat during the festival, he may pickle. So again, the principle is that we're doing what we need for the festival, but we're not doing any more. And the Rambam just emphasizes that in his final comment on the chapter. Shelo yitatzel kodem hamoed. He shouldn't intend to prepare before the festival. B'malachto v'yitkaven la'asota b'moed. He shouldn't intend and prepare prior to the festival so that he do these things on the festival. In other words, the festival, the intermediate days, they really are, there is something special about them. And we do what we need to do, but we don't do anything more than what we really need to do.